Well, everybody, happy Monday. Yeah, I don't typically go live on a Monday, but today I have a special guest. Kind of part of the dynamic duo. You guys, I introduced you guys to Lindsay Brandon, a few videos ago, and so now the other half, which is Graham, and Graham Towerton is an interesting guy, and it's funny as I've gotten to know him, he appears to me to be kind of a clinical permaculturist, which is different, from a spiritual permaculturist, or maybe different from, and this is just me ad-libbing. I don't know if they would all agree with this, but that's how I view it. So what we're going to talk about tonight is just a little bit about their visit, him coming down here, what he thought about it. But then I thought we'd take a deep dive into some of the myths of permaculture and even the stuff that I didn't necessarily understand as I kind of walked into this. So I hope you guys would all help me in welcoming Graham to the stage tonight. Welcome, Graham.
Hey,
What's up, buddy?
thank you, Tag. I appreciate it. And to answer your first question about the spiritual versus clinical permaculture, Lynn, you suggested that to me when I was out at the preparedness festival, and I had to agree with you. I think you nailed it. I'm an engineer by training, and it's hard for me not to be clinical.
Right.
And Lindsay definitely has a very, very strong spiritual connection to everything. And I shared with her your sentiment, and we're in agreement with you. I mean, that's, I guess, the compliment that we are to each other in terms of the work that we do. So, and she's teaching me a lot about the spiritual, and I'm teaching her a lot about the clinical. So, we're balancing each other out. So it's a great combination.
Yeah, you guys are both amazing talents, and to say that Lindsay is spiritual and you're clinical is not a burn in any way.
No,
it's you need the art side of it, you need the creativity side of it, but you also need the clinical side of it. And I think they're all super relevant, but that's how I seen it. It wasn't long getting to know you guys where I'm like, that's what that is. I get that,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, I joke that I can't draw anything without using a ruler. I'm not an artist. and Lindsay's certainly very talented in that aspect as well with, her arts background, majors in arts. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been awesome. I want to get to kind of your visit here a little bit, but before I want to just kind of make a acknowledgement to the audience tonight, which I think is just super important. When I started down this journey and started to discover permaculture, I really thought, Graham, that what it was about was trees and plants. And it was about, how do you plant this plant next to this tree to be, mutual beneficial? How do you direct the water to where you're getting the maximum out of it, right? In order to grow produce. And there's 12 permaculture principles out there. We're going to talk about all 12 of them tonight. But I have to admit to everybody, I did not understand. I did not understand how dynamic that principle was. And permaculture is, I know it stands for permanent agriculture, but to me, it's not really even agriculture. I mean, it's one small piece of it, but I think you can apply those permaculture principles to many, many things. So I'd love to hear your take on that, and then we'll get chatting.
Yeah, most definitely, Tag. The other permaculture contraction is just permanent culture. So while it first started out as permanent agriculture when Bill Mollison and David Holmgren founded permaculture, they recognized very quickly, what you certainly understand now, that there's a big aspect of community attached to agriculture and food, and community, breeds its own culture. And so permanent culture then became the next definition of permaculture. So, you're on the money there.
Yeah. What an amazing thing that really is. I wish I'd understood that in the beginning, because, my wife for many, many years, and B, and everyone, chatting here tonight knows my beautiful bride. She's been on me to, go down the food forest road for a long time. And I just like, what, go plant whatever you want. It doesn't matter. I got other shit to do. And I wish I would have understand better. And I really credit you, and I credit Lindsay, and I, some of the other impacts that I've had in my life from a permaculture world for kind of opening my eyes a little bit, to those kinds of things. And then one other thing I want to mention before we go is that I want to applaud both you and Lindsay for one thing that I think is important, which is you guys, in my eyes, have become bridge builders. There's a huge world out there, and we're taught to hate each other. And we're taught I'm a prepper first, homesteader second, right, off grid or third, just my progression. But at the end of the day, there's so much that unites us. And I talk about this all the time on the channel, but I appreciate you guys being that bridge between those worlds, because that's exactly what we need to do. That's exactly how we fix the problem, is we understand that just because we disagree, I don't have to hate you.
Yeah, no, that's good sentiment again. And, with my background as an engineer, I mentioned that I've worked in oil refining and petrochemicals for most of my life, and that goes tremendously against the grain of what could be considered sustainable agriculture. We need fuel, we need all of those different things, we need energy. And I worked in that for most of my career. So this is a very, very large departure for me to work in permaculture compared to the work that I did previously.
Yeah.
And I find myself building those bridges all the time between engineers that I've worked with and permaculture and everything that goes with that. And there's a lot of people who are making that transition, for all the good reasons.
Yeah.
And so, I recognize that that's a role that I have, regardless of political beliefs, of spiritual beliefs, of, economics, everything I've been taught as an engineer. It's to bring people into the framework of permaculture and help them to understand what it can be.
Yeah. Yeah. And what a big task that is. But I appreciate you doing it, because not everybody's equipped to do it. And not everybody has the two-sided background to be able to create those bridges.
Yep.
So I think it's magical. And I hope that people who are involved in the process can see the magic, because it's powerful stuff, in my opinion. It's just not by mistake. But anyway, so a few months ago, you came down and experienced Kansas and experienced what we do down here. So I'd love to hear your take on all of it, and then we'll start talking permaculture.
Yeah. So first, it was a magical event. I mean, there's so many wonderful people there from different walks of life, different belief systems, different backgrounds. We met. I think you knocked me off for a little bit there. Anyway, so lots of different people that we met, both at the festival, at your place, and clearly they were there with different reasons. They're all there to try to learn something for themselves that will be valuable for their next step of a journey, and preparedness, as a general basis for the festival to exist. Preparedness is a big subject in and of itself, just like permaculture is, right? Permaculture can be part of preparedness, and preparedness is a massive, big umbrella that can capture lots of different things. And so each of those people were there for different reasons. Some were there to present, some were there to receive and learn information, and a lot of really wonderful experiences. One of the favorite ones that I still have is the bartering event. And my gosh, I learned a lot from that, myself. Met a lot of people again through that process of bartering, and just the whole psychology of that event was fascinating, right? Yeah. So you had been gracious in giving me and Lindsay some things that we could barter with, just so we could participate in it, since we traveled from far away. And I found myself, listening to your words about, how to go through the bartering process, and, finding it very, very different from traditional economic transactions that take place. So I enjoyed that tremendously, especially the part of recognizing that it's not a trade of hours, it's not a trade of dollars, or equivalent value. You're looking for something that you want and offering something that somebody else wants, regardless of what the value of the transaction might be. So the first one that I did was to trade, I think, a salad spinner, a little small salad spinner, for an echinacea plant. And, as a permaculture person, I put a lot of echinacea into people's designs, and I install a lot of it. But guess who doesn't have any for himself? So I found myself, I'm like, okay, I'm here in the middle of Kansas. I want to buy a plant. I want to barter for a plant. And so, we made that trade, and it was a good one for me. And so now I have echinacea in my garden, and I don't have a salad spinner, which I don't really have much of a use for. So it was a good event. That was one of the things that I enjoyed, was that whole bartering event, and there was 4 or 5 different bartering activities that I participated in. One guy that really wanted to get rid of a stereo system, and I'm just like, hey, I don't think I can give you equivalent value here. And he said, well, try me out, because he recognized as well it was about the trade, not the value.
Yeah.
And so, I didn't really have room for a full stereo system to bring back to Michigan from Kansas, but, so I passed on that one. But, so that whole psychology, again, of that event, opened my eyes to, it was part of the festival, an opportunity for people to meet and greet, and act as community and have a lot of fun. And we did.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you from my perspective, and I'm notorious for leaning against a tree and watching it all. Mm-hmm. Because it's just so fascinating to me. But it was fun to watch both you and Lindsay having fun and getting in the middle of all of it. And it's never about what you come out of there with. It's really about the experience, just like you were talking about. And it's a trade of needs and nothing more. And I think it's a great hobby, and it's a great thing to learn. I try to teach my kids early on, like, here's a pocket knife. Go see what you can turn this into. Just have fun with it. Because again, I think those are, absolutely great skills. I'll tell you, though, the highlight for me in reference to Graham there was the conversation you had about the water. Because you changed that guy's life. You want to tell us that story? Because you actually impacted his life. He's living a better life today because of you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, so yeah, water treatment, funnily enough, as a chemical engineer, it's been about 20, 25 years of my life to look at water, from an analytical perspective, understand, what each of those different things might be from either a contamination standpoint or a beneficial standpoint, what's in the water, and then treat it and recommend equipment, and at all levels, municipal, home, industrial, for oil refineries, petrochemical plants, etc., for boilers, cooling water treatment, all kinds of stuff. So for me, it's like as natural as permaculture.
Yeah.
And so, that conversation was good about just, again, understanding what he was trying to accomplish. Mm-hmm. I think trying to remove iron was one of the main things that he wanted to do. And, I've got the exact same problem here in my house. So I'd actually gone through that whole process of understanding, what iron can do. I haven't successfully removed all the iron from my water, but I know what the process is, if I wanted to spend more dollars on it. So it was a case of, just my background, my understanding, my knowledge, and having had the experience of doing it here, being able to help that guy with, what he was trying to accomplish. It was probably about a 5 or 10 minute conversation to get from A to Z for him. And I'm glad it had such a positive impact. Yeah,
well, I mean, at the end of the day, when I was growing up, I used to think that power was, getting people to do the things I wanted them to do because they feared me. And as I grew up a little bit, I learned that, or I thought I learned that, getting people to do the things that they want to do because I manipulated them. But as time wears on, what I really learned was, in the end, is the real definition of power is that you empower people to live a better life, and you empower people, you make a positive change in their life. And at the end of the day, you did exactly that, and hats off to you for it. And again, I know he's living a better life. So, last question about the festival, real quick. So, because I asked Lindsay this question, so what can the festival do better?
Expand. It's something that my understanding is you have 2 or 3 of them a year, maybe different two a year. You've had different locations.
Yep.
It needs to go nationwide and global. And again, it's a big subject. Everybody can benefit from it. I don't care what their background is or where they live. I mean, me coming from Australia, everything that was at that festival could benefit somebody in Australia or a lot of people in Australia. So, when we get to do the next conversation, you, me, and Lindsay, we got a lot of questions we want to ask you about how we expand this, because it's a great opportunity. And, I participate in your freesteading.com platform and, meeting people through that. Yep. The festival is something that can bring all those people out of the virtual world and into the real world, where we can sit, we can talk, we can fellowship, we can break bread together, and that's the important part. Lindsay's comment was, it was just like a big family reunion.
Yeah.
And, for me as well, I felt the same. I agreed with her on that. And to me, it's about make the family bigger.
Yeah.
How do we bring more people into the realm of everything that was part of that festival?
Yeah, that's good. That's encouraging to hear, and I'll make sure I pass that on to the staff that runs all that, because I don't, but I'll make sure I get that to them, because I know that they want to get better every single year, and I know they want to offer more and be able to do more, but here we are just in Kansas, so
Kansas is a great spot.
It's a great spot.
And
Yes,
it's central,
Yeah.
So everybody can travel there. Geographically, I think Kansas still holds the central point of the United States. If you don't count Alaska and Hawaii, but it's a good spot to meet. And good soul to the earth people all through there. So
Since we're on that topic, so you got to walk my land,
yes,
and send some other people's land, out there. What'd you think of Kansas? What'd you think about the plants and the land and the ground and the water and everything that's out here?
Well, so I've been through Kansas before, and I've met farmers from Kansas before. Some folks that were verging on the edge of doing regenerative agriculture with their wheat crops, and doing something very different. And I lived in the Panhandle of Texas, so not far from Kansas. I mean, you just go through that thin strip of Oklahoma, and you're in Kansas from where I lived in North Amarillo. So I've been up there several times before. You get the myth that it's all flat, like Nebraska and Iowa, are all flat. And then you have the reality of actually being there. And, you've got the rolling hills, valleys, streams, rivers. It's another great state within the great union that we live within. And each time I go someplace different, I've actually lived in 9 different states. I've visited and worked in all except 6 states. And, Kansas is special. There's no doubt about it. So when you talk about the soil, the trees, the plants, as you travel through different parts of the United States, you'll see some things which are common, all the way across, and some things which are not. So you see oaks and maples, which is a big part of everything east of the Rocky Mountains, right?
Yeah.
Lots of prairie grassland, which is more a feature of everything sort of west of the Mississippi and east of the Rockies. So you can imagine quite easily the bison once upon a time, walking in massive herds across Kansas.
Yeah.
I've been through parts of Kansas and Oklahoma where they're reestablishing, bison herds. So it's a beautiful state, specifically your property, just some fantastic features that we've discussed as part of your design process. I mean, the fact that you've got water on your property, for me, that's always the first thing that I look at, because I come from the driest continent on earth where the average rainfall is like less than 6 inches a year. And I lived in part of Australia where the rainfall could be as low as 2 inches a year.
Yeah.
And so the fact that you've got water, and apparently in abundance, that's a great thing. That gives you a lot of flexibility for what you can do with your agriculture, with your community. And I'm imagining then that this is the same all throughout that northeast sector of Kansas.
Yeah.
And from the properties that we looked at, it's confirmed that, there's an abundance of water, through the eastern part of Kansas. The rainfall is not as much as I get here in Michigan, but it's close and it obviously works for agriculture, given the fact that, Kansas is a fairly large producer of a lot of staple crops.
Yeah, we've had more than 6 inches in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, and I think we're about to get some more, because I think this Hurricane Beryl remnant is supposed to come up here and drown me out. So
yeah, well, pretty hard to complain about water, though. I mean,
I'll take all of it, because and I've had the dry spells here, and the habit that I have of collecting rainwater from my roof, which I've learned to do ever since I was a little boy in Australia. We always collected the rainwater because it might be the only water you get.
Yeah.
And so last year, we had 8 weeks in spring where we only had an inch of rain, right at the time where I'm trying to plant everything and get everything going.
Yeah.
The 3,500 gallons of rainwater storage was a good prep to have, right?
Yeah. It's big. Water. Hey, my Crooked Little Homestead, we call her the Terminator. She's in the chat. She wanted to know if have you ever visited anywhere in Canada?
In Canada, yes, I have several places. I've been to British Columbia, Vancouver specifically, there to look at some biodiesel equipment. I've been to multiple parts of Ontario. I lived in Saskatchewan for 6 months, building a biodiesel project in Fond Lake, Saskatchewan, way in the middle of nowhere. I felt like I was like 500 miles from the Arctic Circle. And, I was there for a winter, so I know what a Canadian winter can look like. A lot of commuting backwards and forwards from Houston at the time to Saskatchewan through Calgary in Alberta. It's the main airport that I was going through. I've driven into Calgary a couple times, as part of that. I have not visited any of the eastern seaboard provinces of Canada, but I've driven through Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and parts of British Columbia and a lot of Ontario.
Yeah, super, super cool. Terminator, I hope that answers your question. So let's talk permaculture. Again, permanent culture. I'm going to change my language right there.
Yeah,
I am, because it's I think it's just, so relevant. So the rule number one is observe and interact, right?
correct.
Yep. And so when you talk about permaculture through your eyes, what does that mean?
So, from the agriculture perspective, or, the design perspective, it is to spend a lot of time, observing. We're encouraged, if we own a property, to not do anything for a year and just spend a year understanding everything that's going on as a minimum. And so that observe and interact, implies that there's a continuous feedback process. And you'll see one of the other, principles talks about accepting feedback. And so the famous Muskokas, I don't know where that is. In any event, the observing and interaction part is to see what's taking place on your property and then maybe respond to that, with a design element. In my place here in Michigan, it's almost billiard table flat on my property. I've got a total of 7 feet change in elevation from the highest to the lowest, and it all takes place within 3 feet on one side of my property. Yeah. And so observation is like, where's the water going to flow? And what can I do to capture that? If I wanted to stop the water from leaving my property, so the interaction might be, or the observation is, the water flows down the hill. It leaves on the western side of my property and joins into a stream. And if I want to keep that water on my property, I've got to intercept it. So what can I do by way of interaction, to arrest that water, using the design principles of slow it, spread it, and sink it? We might put something across the contour so that we can capture the water. And then I use a lot of mulch, small swales, stuff like that. Other things where I can capture the water, so I'm not dependent upon what's in my rainwater tank as a backup, because I'm putting as much water as I can into my soil. So that would be a simple example of observing and interacting. But more complex observations, is to see what's happening with different plants and with insects on my property. So over a longer period of time tag, I've had 10 years here. And as I've built more and more biodiversity, I've seen more biodiversity come to my property in the form of things that I'm inviting in. So birds, as an example, predatory insects, which are coming in because I'm providing them with all the food that they need in the form of, pollinator attracting plants. And so the lions and tigers and bears of the insect world, it would be wasps and bees and dragonflies that are coming to my property and doing special things for me. So, there's a lot of pollination that takes place, but my insect population is now balanced. And I'll give example of one particular pest that I had is the tobacco hornworm that will decimate your tomatoes. Big, ugly caterpillar. Yep. Everyone's probably seen it at least once.
Yep.
And so I don't have those on my property causing a problem anymore, because the predatory wasp comes and lays its eggs on that caterpillar and eats them alive.
Yeah.
And so that started about 3 years ago, and it started because I've got enough, other plant infrastructure in place that brings all those insects in. And so I'm seeing good yields on all my trees because I got all the pollinators coming in. My neighbor across the road has got bees,
Mhm.
and they all visit my property, and they're doing a wonderful job. And I'm quite happy for her bees to be here.
Yeah.
Increasing her yield of honey, and I'm increasing my yield of fruit as a result. So that's another observation that I've made over time, and the interaction being to put enough biomass in place in specific plants to bring all those insects in and balance out my population.
Yeah, that's such good stuff. When I think about permaculture, your words, right? Not, when I think about that as far as it relates to culture, as we build community and as we have relationships, whether that's a husband and a wife, aren't you also observing?
Yes.
You're also interacting in this, also a people game?
Yeah, absolutely. Your festival is a good example of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That interaction that's taking place, the observation that we talked about through the whole
Right.
bottling process,
Right.
getting to understand human psychology, that's definitely in line with the first principle of observing and interacting, and interacting with people. I mean, we are social animals,
Yeah.
and not living in isolation from each other is, the problem that we've had is that we've been living in isolation from each other for the last few years as a result of COVID and a whole heap of fear and everything else that's been promoted to us.
Yeah.
And I think we've got to break out of that cycle. And, the festival is a great example of, bringing people together so that interaction can take place. We need more of that.
Yeah. When I think about that a little bit, I like to think about, because again, I was a prepper first, right? So I kind of come through it through a militant preppant world that's evolved, over time. And I think about the divide in the world today and how they've taught Republicans to hate Democrats and blacks to hate whites. And they talk about all of these things. But if we would just be observant and then interact and understand that our point of view isn't the only point of view, right?
Yeah.
We spend a little bit of time doing that. I think the first principle of permaculture helps heal that divide. I mean, I think it spells out how we can go about doing that far beyond plants. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah. So that's right in line with another one. Use and value diversity. In the workplaces that I've worked, I mean, it gets almost beaten into us about the need for diversity in the workplace. Mm-hmm. And I've obviously experienced a lot of that, with the various corporate cultures that I've worked within. When it says use and value diversity, I mean, I can't tell you how many times that I've been in a room where it's been all white males of my age, and we all come up with one idea and we all agree with that one idea, and it sucks when we implement it, and then at the flip side or the other end of that spectrum is sitting in a boardroom surrounded by people who come from lots and lots of different backgrounds and cultures. And, obviously even just the male female gender difference, and thinking patterns, and all of that comes together in a room. And then all of a sudden you come up with lots and lots of great ideas, and then you can pick out the best ones and work with them. So using and valuing diversity is, part of permaculture and part of permanent agriculture. From the agriculture perspective, I mentioned all the insects that I bring, right? And so I'm valuing the diversity with the plants and the insects and the animals that I've got. Within human culture, we got to do the same thing. Value everyone's thoughts, everyone's ideas. Pick the best.
I'm looking forward to talking about that. We're talking about diversity a little bit because it comes up. I think I remember it's 8 or 9 on the list.
Yep.
Something like that. But we'll get there. So let's talk about the next one, catch and store energy. So what does that mean from a perma agriculture perspective?
Yeah, so it's not necessarily using renewable energy. And I know that you're a big fan of solar, and participate in that industry. And I am too. I've got, my own solar cells, so that's one just practical example of capturing solar energy and turning it into electricity. But within the permaculture design and within a landscape, it might be that I'm going to put plants right on the south-facing wall of my house that are going to capture all the extra heat that gets collected during the wintertime on that south wall.
Right.
And that then releases that heat back out into plants that are sitting in that space. It might be deliberately capturing energy in a greenhouse. That's another example where you're just going to take solar radiation and turn it into heat, which is then going to keep plants alive so that we can extend a season. Not something I had to do ever in Australia. It was put in place a greenhouse because it would rarely freeze any place I'm at. But, here I can get to 25, 30 below in February, and, growing plants in the wintertime is now a challenge for me. And I'm embracing that challenge and, using a lot of greenhouses as a way to capture that heat.
Yeah, well, it didn't say catch and store electricity.
No, it didn't.
Right?
You can't do that. It's all energy, right?
Because to me, catch and store energy, I mean, I store energy in a tree that I don't cut down.
Yeah, correct.
And it's stored there for, some other day, where I happen to need it. And then I think, again, from the prepping world, we preppers store everything. Why would energy be any different?
Correct. And another favorite one of mine is water. You store water and it's a form of energy. If you've got it, like you have at your place, if you got it up on a hill, where it can travel down a stream, I mean, you can capture that in the form of energy as well with a little hydroelectric facility if you wanted to. Most of Canada captures its electricity that way.
Well, and I also think that the comforts that energy brings extends the life of community and extends the life of really all of us, because it lessens the amount of energy capital needed to produce by yourself. So you're also, when it talks about storing energy, could it also be talking about your own personal energy?
Indeed. And if you go back just a little while, before we had fossil fuels available to us, before we had electricity, and again, in that part of West Texas that I lived in, they didn't get electrification until the 1960s.
Yeah.
And I spoke with people who remembered what it was like before then.
Yeah.
Before they had pivot irrigators to irrigate all of their land, they were dryland farmers. And so their yields were a lot less as a result of not being able to tap into the aquifers. Now, just a simple example, but then also they didn't have a lot of other modern day implements available to them. And so there was a lot of manual labor that was done. So that's an exchange that we've made as a result of using, fossil fuels or, other forms of energy that are available to us. We do get to conserve our own individual energy. And as a result of that, well, what happens? Well, we live a little longer. It was a hard life pre-electric, right?
Oh, yeah.
I think people slept a lot better because they didn't have any choice once the sun went down, right? It's like candlelight to read a book, not going to bed.
Yeah,
so, I feel like from a community perspective, if you make use of, physical energy well within a community, then, that individual energy then can get devoted into other pursuits, whether it's arts, whether it's music, whether it's, literature, whether it's spending more time designing and building and constructing things like, you seem to do continuously on your place and within your community, and have more time for each other, Yeah,
I tell people on my channel all the time to think of their energy like a gas tank meter. And through your life, you have a fixed set of energy. And then you have to ask yourself, am I willing to donate some of my gas in my gas tank to this task? Is this task important enough for me to give my limited resource of energy? And I think when you talk about catch and store energy, it allows you to save some of that. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
Well, and that's an exchange as well, right? So I might choose to give up, 2 hours of my time to do a consultation with somebody who really, really needs it. And I know that will pay back out of the universe in some other fashion, right? And usually in multiples.
Yeah. By the way, you made Callie Blackwell's whole day.
That's the one I was talking about.
You made her whole day.
Yeah, she's a wonderful person. Lindsay and I both have a lot of love for her. We both have her book signed, autographed, and I mean that's so special what she's done. And she's a shining light in the world for sure. And giving her a few hours of my time to help, her understand her new property out there, this is the least I can do.
Yeah, she was thrilled. I actually talked to her. She was in my living room as I came up here to do this live with you tonight.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know if she's still here or not, but anyway, they were chit-chatting and all of that. And she wanted to make sure that I knew how lucky girl she thought she was. So I wanted to make sure I passed that along. Okay. Number 3 says obtain a yield.
Yes, absolutely. So a yield could be anything, right? It could be captured energy that we've talked about. It could be the apples off my apple trees. It could be wheat out of a field. It could be fish out of a pond. I mean, there's lots of physical yields. Yields can be more esoteric from the perspective of, what am I doing to my soil to build it up so it's not necessarily being depleted as a result of my agriculture activities. And the large-scale monoculture cropping that takes place tends to deplete the soil in some fashion. So obtaining a yield might not necessarily be for me. It might be for the next generation or the next 10 generations that I'm spending my time to build up my soil so that it produces something of value for those future generations. From a community perspective, yields are endless. I mean, just the example we just discussed about the interaction with Callie, who knows where that goes, right? Spend a little bit of time with her to help her on her property. Lindsay's going to do the same. And how does that multiply? When, the stuff that's going to happen at your place, when it gets built, how does that multiply when all the people who come there for the next festival are going to see, oh my gosh, this is possible. I just presented at the Permaculture Convergence on the last weekend here in Michigan. And what I did was demonstrate a before and current pictures of my property, a 10-year time lapse, if you like.
Wow.
And everybody could see the grass that existed, and then everybody could see all of the different things that have taken place in 10 years. And so I've obtained a yield. I've got a green space that didn't exist before. If I never picked an apple, I've got places I can go sit in the cool under a tree that didn't exist 10 years ago. So that's another yield that I've got, is a nice quiet space to go sit and have a picnic.
I know that I'm a crazy guy because I come from business and I come from that other world. But when you say to me, obtain a yield, to me, what that is that's being efficient versus being busy.
Yep. Or making a profit as opposed to a loss.
Right. Right.
Those are the things we're taught in the business world. And, efficiency is measured in such small levels and parameters. We don't see, again, the benefit of that soil, improvement that might take place over 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 years. How do you measure that on the scale that you and I are used to within the business world, where everything's measured in seconds and minutes and hours?
Yeah, you don't. You don't. But I think by obtaining a yield in your soil, what you're really doing, fast forward now, is you're increasing the yield you consume.
Yes.
Eventually over time. And so what you're doing is you're becoming efficient. And by increasing that soil, it improves your efficiency. It lowers your energy capital that you only have a limited amount of time on.
Absolutely.
Right? That's the exciting part.
I have no doubt about that. You're preaching to the choir on that one. So, the practices that I put in place here to build up my soil, well, guess what they do? It also minimizes how much work I have to do next year and the year after and the year after. I don't bring any other chemical inputs onto my property at all. I'm not using pesticides and herbicides to control the insects. I'm living an organic lifestyle for 10 years. What other benefits am I getting in terms of a yield? Well, obviously health. The food's healthy.
Right.
It's fresh. It's coming right off my property. It's got a travel distance of 50 feet to my house. So there's all kinds of efficiency that can be measured there.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And it's funny that I read that as efficiency, but that's totally how I read it. Okay, so number 4 was apply self-regulation and accept feedback.
Yes. So self-regulation, I'm challenged with that.
Right.
I want to do everything, and so self-regulation is really a choice to wait as opposed to hurry and do stuff. It might be a choice of, okay, I'm not going to put in 10,000 apple trees because 10 is enough. So self-regulation is more about doing right amounts of the right things at the right time, and accepting feedback. Well, I can tell you how many times I've totally sucked as a gardener because I've done stuff wrong, or I've done stuff at the wrong time. And how I've improved things. I'll give a great example is the squash bug that can come through Michigan and wipe out all your squash crops. The zucchini squash, pumpkins, doesn't make any difference. It'll turn up at the right time of the year. It'll wipe everything out. And you have no choice, except to accept the loss, because I could spray with chemicals. I don't wish to. my chickens won't eat them. I don't have a natural predator for them. But I made a shift in time from when I plant my squash crops. And I planted mine last year about 4 to 6 weeks later than everybody else. And guess who had a crop of squash?
Yeah, amazing.
For the first time in 3 years.
Amazing.
And it was just, accepting that they're going to show up. Not anything I can do about it, but I could make a shift in time. So accepting the feedback that, I'm going to lose my crop if I don't plant it at the right time. Go ahead.
I was going to say, something really interesting about this. You just taught me something super, super important. I hate squash. I'm going to now instruct my wife to plant them earlier. Thank you for saving me from eating squash, Graham. You are the man. I hope he's not watching this. We're going to plant them earlier.
I can send you some squash bugs and save you the trouble. Oh my gosh! So you've got to accept some feedback here, Tag. Squash are delicious. They're good for you. You need to plant more of them. You need to make them grow well.
Yeah, to me, the applying, self-regulation, accepting feedback. First of all, it takes discipline to be able to thrive in this world.
Yeah.
There's nobody to come save me. I'm the plumber. I'm the electrician. I'm the, if there anything goes on, I have to be the one. I can't wait for someone to yell at me to get out of bed. I got to get up and do it for myself. And so to me, this is about, discipline and not getting into, prepper or homesteader distraction, because it's easy to look at a 30,000 foot view and get flustered and paralyzed by it. It's a whole nother thing to say, hey, I'm going to go, I'm going to tackle that tree instead of the forest, which again, to me is a, discipline issue. It's about intentional management. And so when I read this, what I read is you got to be intentional. You got to go manage your system and then be smart enough to know you don't know everything. And there's a lot of smart people around you, and don't be so pig-headed to think your way is the only way.
Correct. Yeah. So accepting feedback doesn't necessarily come from your land or from you or from your immediate family. It's like Lindsay and I come in and we can give you some feedback about your orchard, and
you just taught me to plant squash in April. I got it. Great feedback. Good shit.
B's going to slap me upside of the head next time I'm out there.
All right. One other thing I wanted to talk about accepting feedback is just to make the statement that there's a lot of different kinds of intelligence.
Yes.
And, I've got a very good friend of mine who's a double PhD, and the dude struggles to tie his shoes. One of the smartest human beings I know. He's very good at what he's very good at. But we're all smart in our own way. And I think being wise enough to know that, I think will help you at every different step of the journey to be free and to live off grid and to do those kinds of things. Because again, there's a lot of smarts.
Yeah. A lot of places to find it too.
Yeah. Okay. Number 5 was use and value renewable resources and services.
Yeah. Well, we've touched on, solar energy. Obviously that's one. I've used wind turbines before as well in Australia because, where I lived, it was like, almost as good as solar in terms of production. Renewable resources can extend beyond, things like solar and wind. You mentioned the tree that you plant and don't harvest.
Yep.
That's a renewable resource. Branches off my massive big maples here in front will fall off in every ice storm every February. What do I do with that? Well, I can turn it into firewood. I can wood chip it, turn it into mulch. So there's an emphasis here on what are the resources that I have? Are they renewable? First, and they can be in the form of trees and stuff like that. I keep planting more and more and more of them because I want them to be renewable for a long, long time.
Yeah.
They say to plant a garden is to believe in tomorrow. To plant a hickory is to believe in like 100 years of future beyond your lifetime.
Right.
So, that's what I do is I plant lots of things that might not be renewable in my lifetime, but are going to be there for the next generation. So, and I think that's a part of culture as well, right? Mm-hmm. When you're thinking about what you're doing for yourself and only for yourself, mm-hmm. You can get trapped really quickly and be on your own and have no help, no support. But when you start to think about what happens for the next generation and folks in your community and engage those folks as part of the conversation, what can we do that's going to renew our culture for the next generation, so that it's different than what we perceive it's going to be? We see a lot of stuff that could be really bad for the next couple generations. We get taught a lot of stuff that life's not going to be worth living. How do we change that and renew that culture?
Yeah, I think you bring up a super big point. I know you witnessed a bunch of kids classes at the Midwest Preparedness Project.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a renewable source for the community. I mean, if we build a community that's built on ethics and trust and voluntarism, and we build all of that, is that also not its own renewable source for the future, long after you and I are gone?
Absolutely. I teach, I've got 6 kids. I believe that, me and my good wife have taught them well. They've learned a lot of good things. And I think, they also have learned from each other and taught each other a lot of stuff and continue to do so. So I'm super thrilled for their future, because, they're understanding that they need to make their own choices and do things well for themselves, and have that hope for the next generation.
Well, then also I would add another thing. I think the barter thing plays into this a little bit too, because it's kind of a renewable source. I mean, right? Because all any transaction is an exchange of energy.
Yes.
One energy for another energy. And as you're bartering those things and you're learning those things, we're creating those counter and parallel systems and processes. That's also a renewable resource that can live beyond us, is it not?
Yeah, it is. And I mean, even the physical objects, though. I mean, this is a society that throws stuff away.
Yeah.
We joked about your collection of paraphernalia that's on your property there. The Steptoe and Son. And there's a lot of good stuff in there. And the value of that might not be realized by you. It might be then something that you've got there and that you barter with somebody else. And I've seen you do this already.
Yeah.
Where you've taken something out of your lot, you got it for yourself thinking, that'll come in handy one day, and maybe it doesn't, but then you use it again by giving it to somebody else who needs it more than you do. And, I do the same thing. I got a big barn full of stuff, and, those are all renewable resources to me, because I've taken them out of the tip, and put them into a place where they can be reused and recycled.
Yeah. How beautiful is that? It's
wonderful. And I can't tell you how many times I've gone to my barn looking for something, and I found it there because I 20 years ago.
Yeah. Okay. Number 6 was produce no waste.
Well, yeah, this goes hand in hand with the last one, right? I don't throw stuff away. I compost all my green materials that I can. Usually goes through my chickens. But there's windows that I'll recycle and build a greenhouse out of, rather than seeing them go to disposal. I'll collect lumber from folks that are throwing it away. Today, I stopped and picked up 3 pieces of electrical conduit that were sitting on the side of the road that somebody had thrown away. That person had done the right thing, that they hadn't just thrown it straight to the tip, which is good. So they're not producing any waste. I'm taking it and I'm going to use it. So I think there's a lot to be said about, reinvigorating a culture of recycling. I take all of the cream containers, cartons, cut the tops off of them and turn them into pots to put my maple seeds in, biodegradable, and they're not going to the tip. So many different examples. Okay, here we go. Just like I built a chicken coop out of the 2x6 rails of a vinyl fence I bought on Craigslist. Great example. I've got $3,000 worth of plastic pots that a woman was giving away on Marketplace. Didn't want them. She was cleaning out a house to sell it. And I went and picked them all up, and I'm planting all my plants in that I can't put in the ground, like my blueberries, because my soil's too alkaline. So now I've got these 35 and 40-gallon pots. Where would they go otherwise? To the tip? Sit there for a million years?
Yeah, for me, when I read Produce No Waste, I think of it as don't create any motion that's not productive. I think of it as an energy equation.
Yeah.
Right? Because, I'm weird that way. But, I really think about it, okay, what they mean by no waste is don't walk from here to the chicken coop. If there's something you got to carry it while you're there. Don't, when I'm in my skid steer, I don't drive across my property empty-handed. I'm picking up a pile of something that needs moved somewhere along the way. I'm trying to be efficient with my energy output.
I do the same. Walking around, it's like, okay, I've got to go from here to there. What are the 3 other things that I can do on the way that need done? Because it's an energy equation. I've got a finite life and I don't want to waste it. When we look at the human and the cultural perspective of produce no waste, I see that there's so much potential in so many people that's not being utilized.
Mhm.
You know, how do we invite those people into community and have them participate? How do we help them to learn new skills that they can make use of? That's where we produce no human waste.
That's a, we could do a whole show on this topic right here. That's a really, really, really good point. Producing no waste, the generational waste.
Yeah.
Right, that we're experiencing now in so many ways where people aren't living to their full potential because the system has them convinced there is no future.
Correct.
Or the warmongers or the fear mongers have them convinced that the Republicans hate the Democrats and convinced that all the stuff that goes on that probably doesn't. That's really interesting. We could do a whole video on that, generational waste.
I'm certain we could.
That's a great topic. I love that. 7 was design from patterns and details.
From patterns to details.
I'm sorry, patterns to details.
Yeah, so that's, in simplistic design terms, and quickly, because I think we've got, 10 minutes left to cover 7 more or 6 more of these?
We got all the time we need.
Good, perfect. So it's understanding what the patterns are, and so the patterns might be the weather, okay? When do I get my rain? What months of the year do I get my rain? How much do I get in each month? And then designing from that pattern to details. So if I determine that I've got a 3-month gap that I need to cover where I'm not going to have rainfall, and speaking from Australian experience, that could be pretty common, maybe 6 months where I'm not going to get rainfall. The details might be, how big a pond do I need to capture the rainfall? How big a tank do I need in order to capture everything off my roof? Do I need to extend the size of my roof so I got more surface area to collect? So that's just a simple example of designing from patterns to details. I mean, if you're looking at the landscape, you might be looking at what things grow well here, and how do I make or take advantage of that? If there's a certain specific type of tree that grows specifically well and can tolerate, strong winds, turn it into a windbreak and plant lots of them. So that's the simple aspects of designing from patterns to details.
And how would we apply that to community? I mean, I think about the societal, there's a lot of norms that go on, right, in society, and then we can plan for those patterns. And then when we're trying to build community, we can, address those patterns and address the modern society, because I think that's also patterns, is it not?
Yeah, well, certainly. And looking at it from an urban agricultural standpoint, because I'm starting to, get in the middle of some urban communities. And I'll give an example, Detroit, okay? Real close to me, an hour away. 95% African-American population. And so what do we do differently within that community to serve them better, for food? And there's a whole big conversation that's going on about that that's just been started with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I met the guy who's in charge of that recently. And what are we going to do differently compared to the other agriculture that this country has used for the last 60 or 70 years?
Great example.
In your part of the world.
Great example.
Where people are typically going to be 70 to 80 years old, white people who've been farming for 3 or 4 generations.
Yep.
And know how to grow 3 crops,
yeah.
Soybean, corn, and wheat, perhaps, maybe some milo, sorghum, very much different perspectives, on what agriculture can mean, so designing from pattern to details for your property is going to be very, very different from what I might do in downtown Detroit or Cleveland.
Right. Well, and I think you could use the patterns of the industrial farming as you select your land.
Absolutely.
And you could say, hey, where's the runoff, right? You could say, hey, because of these patterns that go on around me. And then I think the other point that I think I would make too is that I would argue that working with the earth, the way the water naturally flows, creates better yields.
Yeah.
Because it creates better yields, I'm also saving my own personal energy.
Correct.
I'm in that.
And then if we look at a big city and look at the same aspect of water, it's like, okay, where are we capturing our water from? Is it off the roof that's contaminated with pollution, or are we going to get it off the streets? How are we going to make sure that water goes to where it's most beneficially used? So very much perspective between those two, right?
Yeah, I joke with my wife all the time. I'd rather drink my pond water than city water.
Oh,
I tell her that all the time.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you. I mean, I got a well here. We've talked about that, and I prefer to have that than be on a municipal system. And having been the person that has treated those municipal systems,
Yep.
oh my gosh, you don't want some of the things that they put in the water to treat the water.
Yeah. Next one was integrate rather than segregate.
Yeah. So we'll talk about monocultures. It's the classic example of segregated crops, right? So corn, 6,000 acres at a time. I have a great friend in Texas, 16,000 acres is what he farms every year, and he grows corn. He says, Graham, I was a corn farmer since I was 20. I'll die a corn farmer. And, he puts milo in his corners, because that's one crop that he can grow as dry land, but everything's corn. I've never seen him do anything else. So that's the greatest example of segregation. And what does that do for the corn crop? Well, it makes it weak to every predator or pest or disease that comes along because there's nothing to stop it.
Right.
So the opposite being to integrate, my peaches out here that I just planted, a row of 20-some peach trees, 8 feet apart. I've got comfrey, mint, lavender, garlic, daylilies, and probably 10 or 15 other different plants in the same row, and that's a design system that provides benefits between each of the different plants that are in it and increases my yields in the same space. So what have I got now in my 150-foot row? Not do I have just 20 peaches, but I've got 12 or 15 other plants that are going to yield over time. And so my efficiency, my value per acre, any kind of metric that you want to name that says I'm a good farmer, I can say that. My 2 peaches that I planted first, I got 200 pounds of peaches off them in their 6th year. And I also had strawberries and raspberries and blackberries and mint and lettuce and daylilies and hostas. Some of these things are edible, some of them not. And it's not just about the yields of the edible. It's also about beauty. It's also about the pollinators. It's also about, what is it doing for my soil? And so I've got 200 square feet occupied by 2 peaches that produce 12 or 15 yields every year.
Yeah, there was a comment earlier about visual yield. And to me, I think having a great yield, part of that is also living a great life and being happy every day, right? That's also a yield.
Yes, absolutely. Right?
I mean,
and there's nothing better than a visual yield of maybe a massive wildflower meadow. I just saw one 2 hours west of here that somebody had just bought a property and had 3 acres of wildflowers already planted on it. And I sat there and looked at it for 20, 30 minutes just in awe of everything that I could see there and walked around for hours and there's so much beauty in that.
Yeah.
Or the simple, 5 roses that I got in the front of my house. I'll go and sit there and I'll look at them because it's just beautiful.
Yeah. When I look at integrate rather than segregate, I start thinking about infrastructure. I start thinking about, how do I get all the systems, not even just infrastructure, but how do you get all the systems working together? How do you get the water all working together with the energy? And how do you manage your own personal energy by integrating all of that stuff together instead of segregating it all out? I know I'm a dork, but that's really where I go.
Yeah. And that's, that could be on the individual basis, but then, looking at it from a community perspective, how do you integrate all the people? So you've got certain events that you do, your festivals that you're integrating the people physically. You've got the freesteading.com where you integrate people in the virtual world. Yeah. But then you also have other activities that you're doing. It's like the one that you told me, and I love this as a great example of community. When you purchase a rail car of lumber, instead of just buying individual, lots of lumber, you get all the benefits of integrating all of those needs into one purchase, right? Big price discount. Let's start with that.
Great example, Graham. Great example.
So, that's what community allows you to do that you cannot do on the individual basis. So,
yeah, I think there's a mental side too, which would be integrating all the different belief structures.
Oh, yeah.
I think of, like you mentioned, the white guys at the board level, or they're not the board level, but the white guys sitting around thinking it's a great idea. Creating all of those different mindsets and all of those different things, I think, makes us all stronger too, because of course, none of us know everything, right?
Well, go back to the example we started with right at the front end of the show of Lindsay and myself, right, with the different skill sets
Right.
and,
How
different,
powerful. Yeah.
The synergy that we gain by working together is, much greater than the sum of the parts.
Yeah. Yeah. You two together are like three.
Six.
Right. Right. Okay, the number 9 was use small and slow solutions.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite challenges again, Tad, because I'm always in a hurry, right? Again, believing I've got a finite life, I want to get everything done today. I'm sure you act, somewhat the same. Just a small observation. I think you're like me in that regard.
Yeah.
But it's taking that time, going back to observing and interacting, is taking the time to do that. And small and slow solutions might be, I've got 4.6 acres of new land that I acquired in September, took possession of it in December. And man, I wanted to get out there and plow the whole 4.6 acres and plant everything that I could.
Yeah.
What I've learned, with the 2.3 acres that I started with, was that one, myself, I couldn't get it all done as quickly as I wanted. So I was forced to slow down.
Yeah.
Secondly, I get much better results when I focus on a small piece of land.
Mm-hmm.
It might be 2,000 square feet instead of an acre. And, the example I've got out the front is about that. It's 2,000 square feet. In August, I put down 12 inches of wood chips, let it sit there. I planted a few trees, some of my canopy trees, some pears, some apples, etc. But I've been watching the chickens out there for the last, 8 months, 9 months, doing a number on that patch of mulch and fertilizing it and turning it over and getting all the bugs out of it and getting all the weed seeds out of it that don't, need to be there. And they're changing the land in their time frame.
Yeah.
I'm seeing the mycelial fungi network that gets built up in amongst all the wood chips there. And, I know that that's then going to feed all of the trees that I planted, so I'm not in a hurry to put the next level in there until it's the right time, and the right time will be is that when all of that wood chip is properly decomposed, and provides the nutrition for the next levels of plants to go in on a broader scale. And so that might be sometime later in spring of next year, or summer or fall 2 years from now when all that takes place. And the proof of that for me has been watching my compost degrade. I start with wood chips that come straight off the truck from the tree service company. And I put those on the ground right outside the chicken coop. And then we take all of our green waste and kitchen scraps and everything. We throw it all out there. We just let the chickens do what chickens do. And every year, I'll probably pull out maybe 40 or 50 wheelbarrow loads of the richest, blackest, fully fertilized compost you can imagine. And all I do is just take everything that's out there, run it through a mesh sieve, take all the good stuff, stick it on my gardens 2-3 inches deep, or I build a completely new garden bed with 6 or 8 inches like I did over the last weekend and plant stuff in it and watch it just go nuts.
Yeah.
Now, I could go buy compost. I could spend a lot of money doing it, but everything that I've got out there is free, hasn't cost me a penny.
Yep.
My chickens have done all the work. So that's an example of a small and slow solution. I'm letting nature do what nature does.
Yeah.
It's slower,
but
guess what? That yield that I get when I put that compost on my gardens far outweighs the time loss.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've got a buddy named Eric who owns the channel Porterhouse and Teal. And he did something amazing. He did it on video. He buried a pork chop in the bottom of a big old compost pile with lots of leaves and lots of stuff. And dude, those chickens, it took them a long time, but they absolutely
found the pork chop, right?
They found the pork chop. They just stirred. Well, he's like, this is how you make the best compost ever with the chickens, is you let them find a pork chop. I thought that was pretty fascinating.
Yeah, they're my hardest unpaid workers. I'll build up piles of leaves or piles of wood chips or piles of anything and watch them tear it down. It might take 3 or 4 months to do it.
Yep.
It'll take me a day to put it all back together again, and I'll do that 3 or 4 times, and I've got compost. It's black gold. So
yeah. When I think about that, it's interesting. We kind of came up with the same thing. I think people get caught up, staring at the tree, and they can't see, kind of beyond that. I was talking to Callie right before coming up here tonight, and I told her, I said, I'd give you a piece of advice, focus on the little goals, because if you do this big thing like this, it just gets it's almost like you get paralyzed by it.
Yeah. Well, so, we talk about small and slow. Let's talk about small. I look at everything as 15-minute tasks.
Mm-hmm.
What can I do in 15 minutes? And it might be, hey, I'm going to book a podcast with you. I'll get that done. And then I might go turn over a compost pile for 15 minutes,
Yep.
Then I might go and reorganize my tool shed for 15 or 20 minutes, So I have ADD, I can't stay focused on tasks for very long. So I find that it's better for me that if I just do 15-minute chunks of anything and then I change what I'm doing every 15, 20 minutes, I feel better.
Yeah. As I read into this a lot, I think it's really about head medicine. And I think that people are really, really smart. And maybe this is the permaculture principle that teaches us to focus on being efficient.
Yeah.
And patient. And patient, right. Yeah, which I think is super, super cool about how much smarts, are kind of into it. Terminator had a message for you.
Yeah, love it. Takes all the weeds, turns it into fertilizer, and makes tea from rabbit manure. Wonderful. Rabbit manure is one of the ones that's really well balanced. I had rabbits for a while, but we had to move for a little bit, and we gave away our rabbits and haven't had them back. But I like the chicken manure, especially because I know what I'm feeding them. Right, everything that's going into them is coming back out onto my land, and it comes from my land. So.
Yeah, I think this is the one you mentioned earlier that you wanted to talk about, which was use and value diversity, right? And I know we talk a lot about these kinds of things.
We have, so from the permanent agriculture perspective, I learned a lot of permaculture before I got my permaculture design certificate. Right. And in 2021, I sat down to do the permaculture design course and, graduated from that. As part of that, I had to do a full design exercise, and I did it on my own property. Mm-hmm. One of the things was to inventory all of the plants on my property. 2.3 acres at the time. I'm like, I got grass, So I went around and did that, took photos of everything. I had to learn, all the names of all the plants and all their uses. I ended up tagged with 130 different plants on 2.3 acres. Yeah. And then when I learned what they're all able to do, 90% of them had an edible or medicinal use. Yeah. Most of which I didn't know until I'd sat down and done that exercise.
Right.
So for me, that was eye-opening because all I thought I had was lawn, but then you get into the lawn and you start seeing what's all there. And now I don't want to mow the lawn because I'm going to be killing all the wonderful things that are sitting in with it. The dandelions, the chicory, the plantain, etc. So I've, learned to use and value diversity. So, I had to learn what diversity was on my own property in terms of the plants. Mm-hmm. And now it's like, okay, how many more can I have? So I've probably added 50 or 60 or 70 more varieties of stuff in the last 3 years just because I know what it means now.
Right.
And so I keep adding more different types of fruit trees, nut trees, vines, grapes, different varieties of stuff so that I can propagate and, provide it to others. I didn't know that there was such a thing as a cold hardy almond until I started to put some in designs. I'm like, oh, that can grow here.
Those are called Howell's almonds, right?
Yeah, Hall's Hardy and Jarvis is another one, and so, like I said, I worked out in California in the fertilizer industry. I used to fertilize 50,000 acres of almonds at a time. Right. They were one of like 7 or 8 different varieties that are commercially grown. And that's all I thought that there would be that would grow here in the United States until I learned differently. And so for me, using and valuing diversity means that I have a lot of capabilities to put a lot of food on somebody's property, no matter where they are.
Yeah.
You know, and I take my hat off to my colleagues that work up in Canada in the Great White Tundra.
Yeah.
And, you know, climate zone 2, climate zone 3, which, you know, is just permaculture speak for really freaking cold.
Yeah.
And they grow lots and lots of things that, you know, can produce food for people, you know, because they've learned how to.
Yeah, and I think this also gets at the very core of what being prepared is, right? I mean, because at any given year, I'm going to lose, you know, some percentage of my crop. My peach trees aren't going to produce, or something's going to happen along, get a fire, you get an infestation, whatever it is. And so I think when you talk about diversity, that protects you from most of that type of catastrophe.
It creates resilience. And I got my own very personal example this year. So we've had a super warm start to spring where we had 70-degree weather in February.
Yeah.
And everything budded and bloomed early. And then guess what happens after that? Well, we got late frosts in April, which killed all of my buds and all my blooms on most of my fruiting trees. So where I told you I had 200 pounds of peaches, I might be lucky if I get 20 actual peaches this year off my peach trees. Mm-hmm. No apricots, no nectarines, no apples, hardly to speak of, no plums, very few cherries. Yep. But all my berry crops have done great. Right. You know? So I got blueberries out the wazoo for the first time, and strawberries and raspberries and blackberries and elderberries.
Yeah.
You know, so that diversity aspect proves its point to me. It's like, okay, I'm going to lose all my stone fruit, all my pine fruit this year, but I've got berries and I've got other stuff that, you know, is coming good because of the seasons being really, really different this year.
Yeah. Great examples. All right. Number 11. Got 2 to go. You ready?
Yep.
All right, number 11 is use edges and value marginal.
Use the edges and value the marginal. So marginal could mean a lot of things. You know, it could mean soil that is really, really depleted, you know, and I've got some great examples of that. You know, valuing the marginal with that depleted soil might be, what can I grow here that's going to change that? You know, you could just say the soil's dead and not do anything with it. And I thought I was going to believe that about the 4.6 acres that I just got last year tagged, in that it had been farmed in soy and wheat and corn for probably the last 70 years in rotation. The soil was compacted, you know, about 6 inches below the surface was a hard pan layer that I couldn't penetrate through with a pickaxe. Yeah. And so I'm like, okay, what am I going to do with this? You know? So I started just planting, you know. Thankfully, the people who'd taken it over to build a big solar farm around me had also had the same idea that they're going to put good plants on it. So they put clovers, they put perennial grasses, they did a lot of really good things, and that changed the soil. And then I kept putting more and more stuff in, you know. So valuing the marginal to me is like, what can I do differently in bad soil or in a situation that's adverse to improve it, you know? Yeah. Because when you do improve it, well, guess what? All those other principles start kicking in. I get a yield, you know. I've changed the soil quality for the future generation. The edges, so in permaculture, we understand that whenever there's a transition between any system and another system, whether it's a forest and a plain, it's a great example, that's where there's going to be a concentration of life that you cannot imagine in terms of abundance. Yeah. You know, so all of the forest species and all of the plain species will come together at that edge, and there'll just be explosions of food, of life, of species, etc. So we learn to design according to that principle, you know, and so the edges for me might be where I transition from a garden to a lawn, you know. I'm going to put those edges deliberately so that they're going to receive more sunlight. You know, there's lawn here at the base level or ground cover at this base level, and whatever is that first plant is going to get more sunlight than the one behind it, you know. So I might put pepper plants there as an example because they need extra heat and sunlight. You know? So that's the permaculture design principle associated with it. From a human and cultural perspective,
yeah,
that one's really interesting. So where I sit, you know, I'm at the edge of town, you know. I'm 3 miles geographically from the center of the city, you know, so I can be downtown within 5-10 minutes. Mm-hmm. I got a very, very busy road that goes, it's kind of like an unofficial loop around the city of 20,000. So using the edges for me, I'm right at that transition between the city and the farms, right? So I'm going to use this place to demonstrate so many different things, and I'm in the perfect place to do it because of all that traffic and everything else that flows by. Our next conversation tag about expanding, your community might have a conversation about how I can help with that here. I'm in a good spot for that, valuing the marginal, this land, again, because it's right at the edge of the city and right at the edge of the farming, I've got good quality soil, so I'm going to value that. I've got a solar farm around me, which might make my place marginal from a value perspective. But, now I don't have a farmer that's spreading manure fertilizer around my property anymore. I don't have glyphosate being sprayed all around my property anymore. So, some people would look at that solar farm and consider it to be a curse. And I look at it and consider it to be a great blessing for me and my family. So it's all a matter of perspective.
Yeah, I was going to say, isn't just the word itself marginal? It's arbitrary.
It is. Yeah, it's a matter of perspective and which side of the line you might see yourself being on, right?
Right.
The margin or the bad side of the margin?
It made me think a little bit about my mom. And, my mom's older. She's in her mid-70s. Her health's not good. She don't get around real good. But I'm telling you, you put that girl in a chair with Murder, She Wrote on TV, and she will snap the hell out of some peas. Right? And so to me, it's about there's a butt for every seat. And it's about, using the resources to their strengths. Like in my mom's particular case, she can peel a million apples sitting in a chair watching Perry Mason. Right? I mean, she can, and it's about some people's marginal could be other people's gold, as you mentioned with your solar farm.
Yeah. Well, and again, from a people perspective, we talked about, the generation of people that, might feel that there's no hope, but, there's a whole range of other people, who might not feel that they've got the ability, they might, have some illness, or physical infirmity that prevents them from participating in life to the fullest. Put that person in a garden and watch them change, in terms of what they're able to do. All of a sudden they're up and about because it's exciting.
Yeah. How interesting. It's so cool. All these topics, we could do a show on every single one of these and probably, talk for an hour, but not tonight. So tonight, let's finish with number 12, which is creatively use and respond to change. Yeah.
So I have to talk about a West Australian example.
Okay.
So in Australia, again, with that rainfall being so low, a lot of people would continue to want to farm, and figure out a way to farm anywhere they could. And it meant cutting down a lot of trees, and that's been a historical fact for 200 years in Australia. Cut down some trees, and plant it and harvest it, and then watch the soil die over the space of 3 to 5 years, rinse and repeat, do it again. And so then what happened as a result of the trees being cut down is that the groundwater table would rise up because there's no trees to pump that water out into the atmosphere anymore, which is, by the way, why the rainfall would stop happening as abundantly. But it would bring all the salt to the surface. Because of the high evaporation rate, that salt would be left there, and millions and millions and millions of acres of Australian land has been literally turned into a salt pan. So creatively using and responding to change, everybody realized a little bit too late the destruction that had occurred, but there's been this massive undertaking in Australia to how do we address all of the soil salinity. And so now there's an entire realm of agriculture about what plants can tolerate salt. How do we manage the salt? How do we leach the salt out of the soil so that we can reuse that land? And progressively now people are taking, millions and millions and millions of destroyed acreage and revitalizing it and turning it back into productive agriculture. But they've had to change their approach.
Right.
And so, there's been a change that was observed over 40, 50, 60, 70 years. The acreage kept spreading. And there wasn't necessarily any other solution other than let's keep doing that. We're going to cut down more trees and plant more acres to wheat, or farm sheep on it with pasture. But now they've taken this approach of, first, we're not going to cut down the trees where we know the groundwater table is high. I mean, that's been banned essentially. And now there's, like I said, a whole movement within agriculture in Australia about how to deal with salinity in soil, and what plants will grow, and how to plant those, and then what kind of successions you can have in that plant kingdom behind it. A human perspective, dude, I think we could spend 10 hours on this one. You could spend 3 hours just talking about how people responded to COVID as one example.
Right.
And so some people creatively used and responded to that change. I mean, the first thing that I noticed, being a person that, works in a garden a lot, was all of a sudden things that I would normally purchase and take for granted that I could get were all out. Didn't matter which store you went to, you couldn't buy plants, because people were buying plants, eggs. Do you remember what happened with eggs?
Yes.
Chickens were next. People bought out all the eggs thinking that, okay, we're going to have eggs and make sure we have eggs in our home. And then everybody decided they're going to be a chicken farmer all at the same time. So, creatively using and responding to change. I mean, that was a change that occurred in our entire society, nationally, locally, globally, whatever region you want to name it on. And people responded differently. Some people got very, very depressed, and I can understand why. Me, I had to keep working. I worked in critical infrastructure.
Right.
I went to work every day after COVID was declared in 7 counties in California, the same as if it hadn't been.
Yeah.
It was like working on a Sunday every single day in the refinery. There was no one there.
Yeah.
So how did I creatively respond to that? I'd go knock on the door and say, guys, come out. Let's chat. Let's be real people. And when I left that environment, there was one operator, I called on the phone to say, hey, look, I'm signing off, and I'm signing off for the last time here before I moved back to Michigan. He said, Graham, please wait out there. He said, we're all coming out.
Yeah. How cool is that?
We took off all the masks, everything else, gave each other big hugs and handshakes and everything else, and, pretended like we're real people.
Well, and I think this is a great point to, to leave this on tonight, which not all change is bad.
Yeah.
Some change is great, and the great awakening is upon us. And I promise you, there's lots and lots of people waking up every single day and trying to do for themselves and trying to live that more natural, way of life. And I think it's through people like you and people like Lindsay who are, really spearheading a lot of that change. And so I just can't thank you guys enough. And I think it's super exciting. But before we go, how do people get a hold of you if they're interested in learning more? What do people do to find Graham? Okay, so
permaculturecanada.world, is the website. And if they want to contact me by email, it's Graham, Graham, at permaculturecanada.world. You can find me on Instagram at Graham Towerton. You can find me on Facebook as Permaculture Adventures of Michigan. So I've got lots of different places. My own individual website is permacultureadventuresmi.com. Okay. And so from there, you can link to all my social media. Be happy to be in touch with people. There's nothing I enjoy more at this point of my life. I've told people that I had a 34-year career in engineering, and I want to chase it with a 34-year career in permaculture. Which will take me well into my 80s. And, I've modified that somewhat now to say I'm going to keep doing permaculture until they take me out of here in a box. So,
right.
There's nothing I enjoy more now than helping people change their lives by putting food in their backyards, helping them to be healthy. So many different things that people can gain by being in a garden. And I'll end with my favorite quote from Jeff Lawton, the permaculture designer extraordinaire that I got my permaculture design certificate from. All the problems of the world can be solved in a garden.
Yeah.
And there's no greater truth than that.
Yeah. Well, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you. And I know this has been a super interesting adventure for you and I and Lindsay and others, right? It's been very interesting, but I wouldn't change it. And I'm happy to be where I am. And I'm happy to have made, friends with you and Lindsay. And again, lots of other people. And we're going to continue to do these things. And maybe we'll do a series or something coming up. It talks about the human side of all of this, because it is dynamic, man. There's a lot.
It is. Yeah, absolutely. I'm up for that. Tag, thank you. On behalf of Lindsay and myself, we've certainly enjoyed every part of our interactions with you. So let's keep it up.
Yep, sounds good. All right. Well, hey, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the interview that we did with Graham. He's a really smart guy, and it's so fun to me to watch that different take, because, again, he's clinical, right? And that's said with nothing but love, and it's just, super smart stuff. And we're going to continue down the journey. I hope to share a lot with you guys as we go through the permaculture world, and building demonstration sites and doing all of these things. And I'll try to keep you guys up to speed. Go look up Graham. Go give him some love. He donated his time to be here tonight, and so I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Until we do it again, hold the line, don't give an inch, tag out. We'll see you guys Friday.